The cab stopped in front of a neat two-story house with a green lawn. I looked at my watch. It was almost 3 in the afternoon. The drive from Pittsburgh had taken longer than I'd bargained for. The driver, a young guy with an earring in his ear, unloaded my 2 suitcases onto the sidewalk and wished me a good day. It took me a while to get my wallet out of my bag. My fingers weren't as nimble as they used to be. "Thank you," I said, handing him the bills. "Keep the change." When the cab left, I was alone in front of my son's house. The last time I'd seen Randall was 3 years ago, at Harold's funeral. My husband had died of a heart attack at the age of 78, and my son had flown in for 2 days, just long enough for the ceremony. Didn't even stay to help with paperwork and stuff. "I've got a project on fire, Mom, you understand?" he said then. Oh, I did. My whole life I understood. When he didn't come for Christmas because work. When he forgot to say happy anniversary because he was away on business. When he didn't call when he heard about my knee surgery because the phone was dead. I always found excuses for his actions. That's what mothers do. The house looked more expensive than I expected. Brick front, manicured shrubs, 2-car garage. I knew that Randall worked as an engineer for a construction company and his wife, Heather, as a manager at an insurance firm. They had no children, though they'd been married for 12 years. I took a deep breath and pushed the suitcase toward the house. It was heavier than I thought it would be. It contained everything that was left of my old life. The house in Pittsburgh, where Harold and I had lived for almost 40 years, had to be sold. After he died, I couldn't support it on my modest pension as a former supermarket cashier. Taxes, utility bills, roof repairs all became an overwhelming burden. When I called Randall and told him about my situation, he was silent for a long time. Then he said they needed to discuss it with Heather. 3 days later, he called back and told me I could move in with them. "Temporarily, Mom, until you find something suitable," he emphasized. I went up on the porch and rang the doorbell. Footsteps were heard from inside and the door opened. Heather stood on the doorstep, a slender woman with short blonde hair and thin lips that were now stretched into a smile. I'd only seen her a few times over the years, and each time she'd been impeccably polite and completely cold. "Margaret, you've made it at last," she exclaimed with feigned enthusiasm. Come in, come in. Randall's still at work, but he'll be here soon." I stepped through the door, and Heather put her arm around me, barely touching my shoulders. She smelled of expensive perfume and something else, maybe impatience. "Let me help you with the suitcases," she said, grabbing the smaller of the two. "We'll have to leave the other one here until Randall gets back." The hallway was spacious and bright. Oak parquet flooring, a carved mirror, a stylish console with a vase of fresh flowers. Everything spoke of wealth and good taste. I felt out of place in my old suit and stubby shoes. "You have a lovely home," I said, trying to make conversation. "Thank you," Heather nodded. "We've recently remodeled. Come on, I'll show you where you'll live." I expected her to take me upstairs, where the bedrooms were probably, but instead we went through the kitchen to the back door. "I'm afraid we don't have a spare room in the house itself," Heather said as she opened the door to the backyard. "Randall uses the second bedroom as a home office, and we have a guest room in the third, but it's being renovated." I felt something inside me clench, but I didn't say anything. We crossed the neat backyard and headed toward a small structure in the far corner of the property. It was an old barn, painted the same color as the house. "We remodeled it last summer," Heather explained as she unlocked the door. "We wanted to make a studio for guests, but we never finished it." The inside of the barn was clean and dry, but very cramped. A single bed, a small table and chair, a narrow closet, and a tiny bathroom with a flimsy door. "There's a heater here," Heather pointed to an old radiator against the wall. "And there's Wi-Fi, though the signal's a little weak sometimes." I looked around the room that was to be my new home. After the spacious house in Pittsburgh, it was humiliating. It was like being put in a kennel for an old, unwanted dog. "It's temporary, of course," Heather added, noticing the look on my face. "Until we can think of something better. Make yourselves comfortable, and I'll go make dinner. Randall will be here around 6. She left, leaving me alone with my suitcase and my thoughts. I sat down on the bed. The mattress was hard and creaky. In the corner of the ceiling, I noticed a cobweb. The window overlooked the blank fence of the neighboring property. I felt a lump come to my throat, but I held back the tears. After all, I'm 75 years old and too old to cry. I opened my suitcase and started pulling out my things. There wasn't much. Most of it had to be sold with the house or given away. I hung 2 dresses and a suit in the closet, put Harold's picture on the table. A tall man with shrewd eyes and a kind smile looked at me from the picture. Harold was a good husband. Quiet, dependable, a little nerdy. He worked as an accountant all his life and came home at 6 o'clock sharp every night. We were never rich, but we always lived decently. Randall was our only child. A late one. I was almost 40 when he was born. Maybe that's why I was harder on him than I should have been, afraid of spoiling him, afraid I wouldn't have time to raise him properly. Harold often said I was too hard on the boy. Maybe he was right. I remember yelling at 12-year-old Randall for a C in math. I remember making him rewrite his homework 3 times until his handwriting was perfect. How she forbade him from going to prom because he came home after curfew the week before. I just wanted a man to come out of you, I told him. But maybe I was just smothering him with my care and control. And here's the result. At 75, I'm sitting in the barn that has become my new home, and my only son barely bothered to take time off work the day I arrived. 2 hours later, I heard a door slam in the yard. Randall's tall figure flashed through the window. He was walking toward the barn at a leisurely pace, with the expression of a man doing an unpleasant duty. I hurriedly fixed my hair and pulled up my blouse. "Mom," he said, entering without knocking. "You made it." It wasn't a question, so I just nodded. Randall looked tired. The wrinkles around his eyes were deeper than I remembered, and there was gray in his dark hair. He was wearing a business suit, but his tie was already off to the side. "How was the trip?" he asked, not making any attempt to hug me. "It was okay," I answered. "A little tiring." There was an awkward pause. We looked at each other like strangers. "Heather showed you your room." He circled the barn. "Yes, thank you. It's very, cozy." Randall frowned, as if realizing the falsity of my words. "It's only temporary, Mom. Until we finish the repairs on the guest room, a leaky pipe, and we had to replace the floor and walls." I nodded, though I didn't see any signs of repairs as I walked through the house. No building materials, no smell of paint, nothing. "Well," Randall said, shuffling from foot to foot, "dinner will be ready in half an hour." Heather made lasagna. "Sounds wonderful," I said. I'll see you back at the house." He nodded and walked out, closing the door behind him. I exhaled. The first meeting had gone worse than I'd expected. So many years had passed, and still the same wall between us. I thought about how many times over the years I'd imagined our reunion, how he would hug me, tell me he missed me, how we'd sit in the evenings with a cup of tea, making up for lost time, foolish dreams of an old woman. I changed into a more decent dress and headed towards the house. As I walked through the backyard, I noticed that the grass here wasn't as manicured as the front. There was a pile of last year's leaves in the far corner. Apparently, this part of the property wasn't shown to guests. The glass door to the kitchen was ajar, and I heard muffled voices. Heather and Randall were arguing about something. I slowed down, listening. "You could have at least pretended to be happy to see her," Randall said. "I did," Heather snapped at me, "but don't expect me to jump for joy. This was your idea." "My idea? You're the one who said it was an opportunity." "Quiet," Heather hissed. She might hear. I coughed and pushed the door open, pretending I'd just walked in. Heather was standing at the stove, stirring something in a pot. Randall was sitting at the bar with a glass of whiskey. "Ah, Margaret," Heather smiled. "You're just in time. Dinner's almost ready." "Can I help you with anything?" I offered. No, I got it under control. Randall, why don't you show your mom the house?" My son got up reluctantly. "Yeah, sure, come on, Mom." We walked through the living room, a large room with a leather couch, a glass coffee table, and a huge TV on the wall. Everything looked expensive and a little impersonal, like a page out of a furniture catalog. "This is where we usually spend our evenings," Randall said. "We watch movies on the weekends." There were fancy magazines and a TV remote on the table. No books, photos, or personal items. "Very nice," I said. Next was the dining room with a long, dark wood table and a crystal chandelier. There were glasses and decorative plates on the sideboard. We only eat here on special occasions, Randall explained. Usually in the kitchen. I noticed the painting on the wall, an abstract canvas with bright spots. Those things always seemed like a waste of money to me. Did Heather pick that out? I asked, nodding at the painting. Yeah, she has good taste, Randall said, and I could hear the pride in his voice. We went up the stairs to the second floor. It was Randall and Heather's bedroom, bathroom, and what was called the home office. Randall didn't offer me a peek into the bedroom, but the door to the office was open. I saw a large desk with a computer, bookshelves, and a fold-out couch. What's that? I asked, pointing to the couch. Randall hesitated. Sometimes I work late and sleep here so I don't bother Heather. I was about to ask about the guest room being renovated, but at that moment Heather called us over for dinner. At the table in the kitchen, Heather arranged the lasagna on plates and poured wine for me and Randall. She chose mineral water for herself. To family reunions, she said, raising her glass. We clinked glasses. The lasagna was delicious, but too spicy for me. I washed it down with wine and felt a warmth spread through my body. How do you like our humble home, Margaret? Heather asked with a smile that was a kind of challenge. It's beautiful, I said. It must have cost a lot. We work hard, Randall said dryly. Of course, dear, I agreed. I can see that you've accomplished a lot. The conversation didn't go well. We exchanged platitudes about the weather, about my trip, about Randall's work. We didn't talk about the past, as if we had an unspoken agreement not to touch on painful subjects. How's the house sale going? Randall asked as we were finishing our dessert, a store-bought apple pie. I already sold it, I replied. 2 weeks ago. You did? Randall perked up. Did you get a good price? I saw Heather give him a warning glance. Enough, I said evasively. I've paid off my debts and have a little left over to live on. So you're not short of money then? Randall continued, ignoring my wife's disgruntled look. I wouldn't say that. My pension is small, and the money from the sale of the house is all I have. But still, how much? Randall insisted. Just to know that you are secure. I told him the amount a decent amount for a modest house in a not-so-pretty Pittsburgh neighborhood. Randall's eyes sparkled and Heather nodded slightly. And where do you keep that money? Randall asked casually. In the bank? Some of it in the bank, some of it in securities, I answered. Harold always said you can't put all your eggs in one basket. Your father was a wise man, Heather said, turning to Randall. By the way, honey, did you remember that the car loan payment is due tomorrow? Randall's face darkened. No, I didn't forget. We'll figure it out. Are you having financial difficulties? I asked, remembering their conversation in the kitchen. No, not at all, Randall said hastily. It's just a temporary cash flow problem. We all do. Yes, we do, I agreed. Harold was always saving for a rainy day. He said you should have at least 6 months to live on. That makes sense, Heather nodded. Too bad we don't always follow that advice. After dinner, I offered to do the dishes, but Heather declined, saying they had a dishwasher. Randall retired to the living room to watch some sporting event, and I, feeling tired after a long day, decided to go back to the barn. Good night, I said, standing in the kitchen doorway. Good night, Margaret, Heather replied without turning around from the sink. Breakfast is at 8 if you're up early. I went out into the yard. The evening was warm, but I felt a chill. Entering the barn, I turned on the light, a dim bulb under the ceiling, and sat on the bed. The walls were thin, and I could hear crickets chirping somewhere nearby. I undressed, washed my face in the tiny sink, and got into bed. The mattress was hard, the pillow too high. Through the small window, I could see a dark sky with no stars. Lying in the dark, I thought about today. Heather's fake smile, Randall's coldness, the way his eyes brightened when money was involved. About the barn that had become my new home. I didn't cry. Tears I'd left behind in Pittsburgh when I closed the door of my house for the last time. Now I just felt tired and strangely numb. I was 75 years old, had sold the house I'd lived in most of my life, and had come to visit my son, hoping to spend the rest of my days in the warmth of the family home. But I ended up in a barn, with a son who was only interested in my money. What am I doing here? I thought, falling into a restless sleep. Why did I even come here? The last thing I heard before I fell asleep was Randall's muffled voice from the open window of the house. How much did she say? 200,000? That would solve all our problems, Heather. Every single one of them. The morning in the barn was colder than I'd expected. Arlington's May sun hadn't yet warmed the thin walls of my new home. I woke up at 6 a.m., a habit I'd developed over the years of rising early for work, a habit I'd never let go of even in retirement. The morning light was streaming through the small window, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the sound of passing cars. I reached for the bedside table where Harold's picture stood. His calm gaze seemed to ask, "How do you like it here, Margie?" My husband had always been the one to call me by that diminutive name. "It's not very comfortable, to be honest," I whispered, answering the mute question. I rose slowly, feeling my joints aching after a night on the hard mattress. There was barely enough room to turn around in the tiny bathroom. I washed my face with ice water. Hot water seemed to be a luxury here, and began to dress. I picked out a gray dress and cardigan, brushed my gray hair, and gathered it into a neat bundle. No makeup at my age, it only emphasized the wrinkles. At 7:45, I left the barn and headed for the house. The morning was crisp, but it promised a warm day. Dew glistened on the front lawn, and birds chirped in the lilac bushes. For a moment, I felt a pang of longing for my garden in Pittsburgh, where every plant had been planted by my hands. The front door appeared to be locked. I walked around the house and knocked on the kitchen window. A minute later, a sleepy Heather in a silk robe appeared. She raised her eyebrows in surprise when she saw me, but then opened the door. "Margaret, you're so early," she said with a touch of irritation in her voice. "We usually have breakfast around 9 on weekends." "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm used to getting up early," I said, feeling awkward. "I can come back later." "No, no, as long as you're here," she waved toward the kitchen. "Coffee?" "I'd love some." Heather turned on the coffee machine, a complex device with many buttons and blinking lights. I sat down at the bar, watching her sparing, frugal movements. Not one unnecessary gesture. "Is Randall still asleep?" I asked, trying to start a conversation. "Yeah, it's his day off. He doesn't usually get up until 10 o'clock on Saturday." The machine beeped, and a minute later, Heather put a cup of espresso in front of me. She pulled a yogurt and fruit out of the fridge. "Would you like some toast?" she asked, pulling out the bread. "Yes, thank you." We ate breakfast in awkward silence. I tried to think of a topic of conversation, but everything that came to mind seemed inappropriate or too personal. Finally, Heather spoke first. "How did you sleep in the guest house?" The guest house was what she called the barn. Interesting wording. "It was fine, thanks," I lied. "It's just a little cold in the mornings." "Oh, yeah, the heater's not very efficient. Randall was going to replace it, but he couldn't get around to it." She said it as if it were an insignificant detail, not the comfort of an elderly person. "It's okay, I'm used to the cooler weather," I said, not wanting to sound ungrateful. Heather nodded, clearly losing interest in the conversation. She pulled out her phone and started looking at something, frowning occasionally. At one point, she cursed quietly to herself. "Is something wrong?" I asked. "No, just," she faltered. "There was a problem with the loan payment. The bank sent a notice. She said it casually, but there was calculation in the look she gave me." "A home loan?" I asked. "No, on Randall's car. He bought a new BMW last year," she sighed. Maybe it wasn't the smartest decision in our financial situation. I remained silent, not knowing what to say. The way I see it, if you can't afford a car, you don't buy one. That's the way we were taught. "Do you have financial difficulties?" I asked directly. Heather hesitated for a moment, as if deciding whether to be frank. "To be honest, yes," she said finally. Randall had invested in a friend's project, some kind of technology startup. It was promised to be a gold mine, but in the end it went bust. We lost almost $100,000. I almost choked on my coffee. $100,000. Harold and I had never saved that much in our entire lives. "And then there were the medical bills," Heather continued. "Randall had back surgery last year. Insurance covered part of it, but we still had to pay a lot of money." She gave me a look full of meaning. "But we'll get through it," she added with a strained smile. "We always have." By 11 o'clock, Randall came down sleepy and unshaven. He was surprised to see me in the kitchen. Mom, how long have you been here? Since 8, Heather answered in my place. Your mom's an early bird. Randall nodded and headed for the coffee machine. He looked older than his years, wrinkles around his eyes starting to go bald, a small belly above the waistband of his homemade pants. I suddenly thought I didn't know this man at all. My son, my flesh and blood, and yet a complete stranger. What are your plans for today? He asked, sitting down at the table with a cup of coffee. It was Heather's question, but I answered, I thought I'd look around a little, maybe walk to the nearest store. There's a store 3 blocks from here, Randall said. But it's supposed to rain today. Why don't you stay home? Home is an interesting choice of word for a shed in the backyard. I'm not sugar, I won't melt, I smiled. All my life I've been going to work in all kinds of weather. Whatever you say, Randall shrugged. He turned to Heather. Did you talk to the bank? Yes, she said quietly. They've given us a 2-week extension, but then it's either pay up or... She gave him a meaningful look. She looked at me meaningfully, and Randall looked at me too. I pretended not to notice the silent exchange. I'm going to go pack for my walk, I said, getting up from the table. Mom, wait, Randall said suddenly. Did Heather tell you about our financial difficulties? A little bit, I answered cautiously. You see, we're in a bit of a bind right now. He looked at his wife as if seeking support. This startup was supposed to be very profitable. My friend Gordon is a smart guy. He had a great idea. Who knew it would turn out like this? Sometimes investments don't pay off, I said in a neutral tone. Exactly, Randall cheered up. But we're really struggling right now. The bank is threatening to repossess the car if we don't make the payments. And then there are the credit cards. Basically, we're in a deep hole. He stopped talking, looking at me expectantly. I realized what he was getting at, but I decided not to make it any easier. It's very unpleasant, I said. I hope you can find a way out. Actually, Mom, Randall cleared his throat. I was wondering if maybe you could help us. Temporarily, of course. Just to get out of this hole. We'd give it back as soon as things got better. Here it is. First run. I expected this, but I still felt a pang of disappointment. How much do you need? I asked. 30,000 would solve most problems, Heather answered quickly. We'd pay off the most pressing debts. 30,000, almost a sixth of all the money I had left. That's a lot of money, I said slowly. We know, Randall added hastily. And we're very grateful that you're considering it. I hadn't said anything about my decision yet, but he was already thanking me. It's a typical manipulator's trick to assume agreement. I need to think about it, I said. It's all I have saved for my old age. Of course, Mom, Randall smiled, strained. There's no pressure, just the sooner the better. The bank won't wait forever. I nodded and walked out of the kitchen, feeling their gazes at my back. Back in the barn, I sat down on the bed and took a deep breath. So here we go. The first attempt to get to my money, and, I'm sure, not the last. The day passed in dreary uncertainty. I did go to the store, bought some groceries for myself. I didn't want to be a burden and eat their food. When I returned, Randall was rummaging around in the garage and Heather was reading a magazine on the back porch. They both pretended not to notice me. That evening, as I was cooking myself a modest dinner on the small tile in the shed, there was a knock at the door. It was Randall. Hi, Mom. Can I come in? I nodded and he squeezed into the cramped space of the shed. He smelled like beer. Listen, about our conversation today, he began. I didn't mean to pressure you. I understand, I said. It's just that we're in a really tough situation, and you're the only one we can turn to. He sat down in the only chair, and I remained standing by the stove, stirring my oatmeal. I'll think about it, Randall, I repeated. Thanks, Mom, he smiled. By the way, how do you like it here? Are you comfortable? It's fine, I said, not wanting to complain. It's just cold in the mornings and the water's barely warm. Yeah, there's a problem with the water heater. I'll see what I can do. He looked around. You know, it costs money to run this place too. Electricity, water, especially if you use the heater 24/7. There it is. The second move is a hint that I have to pay my living expenses. I can share in the cost, I said in a level voice. How much do you want for rent? Randall looked confused. He obviously hadn't expected such a direct question. No, 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 Mom. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that everything is expensive right now. He stood up. Well, I won't interrupt your dinner. Good night. He walked out, leaving me with a bitter residue. The tactic was clear. Ask for a large sum of money first and then pressure, insinuating that I was a burden. I finished making my oatmeal, but my appetite was gone. The next morning, I decided not to go to the house for breakfast. Instead, I drank tea and cookies I'd brought from the store and read a book I'd brought with me from Pittsburgh, an old volume of Dickens, Harold's favorite author. About noon, Heather peeped into the barn. She was dressed for going out, an elegant dress, heeled shoes, flawless makeup. Margaret, Randall and I are going to a barbecue at a friend's house. Would you mind being alone until tonight? Of course not, I replied. Have a good time. Thank you, she paused in the doorway. By the way, did Randall talk to you yesterday about our situation? Yes, he did. And what did you decide? I could hear the impatience in her voice. I'm still thinking, Heather. She pressed her lips together. I understand. But if my mother-in-law were in a difficult situation, I wouldn't hesitate for a minute. Another appeal to my conscience. I don't doubt it, Heather, I said calmly. But 30,000 is no small thing to me. Of course it is, she smiled strained. I just thought I'd remind you. We'll be back late, so don't wait up for us. The house was empty after they left, and I took the opportunity to look around. I was embarrassed to go through their things, but I wanted to get a better sense of the situation I was in. There were unpaid bills on a table in the living room, utility bills, credit cards, health insurance. The amounts were impressive, but not catastrophic. In a drawer of the sideboard, I found the paperwork for Randall's car, a brand new 5 Series BMW. The cost made me whistle. The car was worth as much as half of my former home. In Randall's home office, I found bank statements tossed carelessly on the desk. A quick look showed that they were indeed in the negative, yet had spent money on expensive restaurants, designer clothes, and a vacation in the Bahamas just 3 months ago. I was no financial expert, but it was clear even to me. Their problems weren't so much bad investments as an inability to live within their means. Back in the barn, I pondered for a long time. Should I give them the money? On the one hand, it's my son. On the other, I've seen how they handle their finances. 30,000 would likely melt away in a matter of months, and they would come back for help. By evening, I had made a decision. I would give them 10,000, enough to show goodwill and help with the most urgent bills, but not enough to keep them living large. Randall and Heather came back after 11. I could hear them coming into the house, laughing, talking loudly. There were other voices. They must have brought guests. The music and laughter carried on until well into the night. Monday morning, Randall left for work early, and Heather stayed home. She worked remotely 2 days a week. Around 10, I knocked on the door of the house. Heather opened, holding a cup of coffee in her hand. She looked tired after last night's party. Good morning, Margaret, she said without much enthusiasm. Do you need anything? I wanted to talk about money, I said bluntly. She instantly perked up. Of course, come in. We sat down at the kitchen table. Heather tried to hide her impatience, but her eyes betrayed it. I've been thinking about your request, I began. And I thought I could help. Not with $30,000, but with 10. Heather's face twisted slightly in disappointment, but she quickly pulled herself together. That's very generous of you, Margaret. We're very grateful. I can give you a check right now, I said. Or I could wire the money to your account. A check will be fine, she said quickly. I'll deposit it today. I pulled out my checkbook and wrote a check for $10,000. As I handed it to Heather, I felt a pang of regret. Not about the money, about the fact that our relationship had come down to this. I hope this will help you with your most urgent problems, I said. Absolutely. Heather folded the check neatly and tucked it into her pocket. You have no idea what a gift this is to us. But I did. And I also imagined that this was just the beginning. The next day, Randall came by my barn after work. He was unusually animated and even brought a bottle of wine. Heather said you've been a big help, Mom, he said, uncorking the bottle. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, I replied. You're my son. We had a glass of cheap wine, not the quality I was sure Randall and Heather were used to. He talked about work, about future plans, about how they were going to get out of the financial hole. I listened, nodding, but I could sense the falseness in every word he said. Over the next few days, I noticed a change. Heather started dropping by with a cup of tea, wondering how I'd slept if I needed anything. Randall fixed the leaky faucet in the barn bathroom and even brought in a new heater. An old one, but better than the old one. This game of caring was so obvious that it made me uncomfortable. They were caring for me like a hen laying golden eggs. And I knew that another request would soon follow. It didn't take long. A week after my first donation, Randall invited me over to the house for dinner. Heather cooked a roast, my favorite dish, which of course she couldn't have known about, but pretended to remember. Over dessert, Randall cleared his throat and exchanged a look with his wife. Mom, there's something we wanted to talk to you about, he began. Yes, I put the spoon down. Your help has been invaluable, really. We were able to pay off the most urgent debts. I'm glad to hear that, I nodded. But you see, that was just the tip of the iceberg, he sighed. We're still having problems with the mortgage. The bank is threatening to repossess the house if we don't make the late payments. How much do you need this time? I asked bluntly. Randall looked embarrassed by my bluntness. 25,000 more, he said. That would cover the arrears and give us a few months' breathing room. I stayed silent, pondering the situation. On the one hand, I didn't want them to lose the house. On the other, I saw that this was the beginning of an endless spiral. 25,000 today, 50,000 tomorrow, and the day after that, all my savings. I have to think about it, I said at last. Of course, Mother, Randall nodded. But not for too long if possible. We don't have much time. Heather added, Margaret, we realize we're asking a lot, but this is our home. We don't want to end up on the street. I remained silent again. The thought that they might lose the house bothered me, but what bothered me even more was their attitude toward money and toward me. Around midnight, I heard voices from the side of the house. The window was ajar, and the warm spring breeze carried scraps of conversation. Randall and Heather were sitting on the back porch, sipping something from glasses. They couldn't see me in the darkness of the barn, and I unwittingly witnessed their conversation. Do you think she'll give more? Heather asked. She should, Randall said confidently. She's my mother. Besides, where would she go? I don't know, she didn't seem too convinced. It's a tactic, Randall grinned. She wants us to ask. Old people like to feel needed. I felt like I'd been kicked in the butt. Old people. Where can she go? I wasn't a mother to them. I was an ATM machine. What if she says no? Heather asked. Then I'll have to push harder. Randall sipped from his glass. Hint that if she didn't help, she might be looking for another place to live. You think that'll work? I'm sure it will. She's not going anywhere. She's got no one but us. Besides, I'm the only heir. Sooner or later, all that money will be ours anyway. Heather laughed. Hopefully sooner rather than later. She doesn't look well. I bet the old woman won't last long in that barn, will she? They laughed together, and the sound of their laughter sent an icy wave through me. So that's how they saw the situation. Squeeze all the money out of me and then wait for me to die? We'll have to get her to give me power of attorney, Randall continued. To have access to all her accounts, for her own good, of course. Of course, Heather laughed again. For her own good. They talked for a long time, but I wasn't listening. I closed the window and sat on the bed, feeling the cold rage growing inside. Everything had become very clear. I was not a mother to them, not a person, but only a means of solving their financial problems. They not only didn't love me, they despised me, laughed behind my back, wished for my imminent death. Well, if they want to play that game, I can play it too, only by my own rules. 3 weeks had passed since the night I'd overheard Randall and Heather talking. 3 weeks in which I'd pretended I didn't know anything, that everything was going my way. I smiled when Heather brought me fresh towels. nodded when Randall wondered if I was cold in the barn. I played the part of the gullible old lady flattered by the family's sudden attention. In those 3 weeks, I gave them another 15,000 after much persuasion and defiant resistance. I saw how their eyes lit up at the sight of the check, how they could barely contain their triumph. I noticed Heather's new clothes and the expensive watch on Randall's wrist, clearly not the most pressing expenditures for a family on the verge of financial collapse. Their appetites were growing. Yesterday, Randall had mentioned casually that they needed another 35,000. One last payment, Mom, and we'll be back on our feet. I pretended to consider his request, but inside I could feel the anger boiling up. Did they really think I was that naive? This morning, Heather knocked on the barn door earlier than usual. She was dressed in a smart business suit. Apparently, she was going to work. Good morning, Margaret, she smiled. Randall and I wanted to invite you to dinner tonight. We're going to have something special. Thank you, Heather, I replied. I'd love to come. Great. 7 o'clock tonight. Randall's cooking steaks. She left and I stayed sitting on the bed thinking, something special. I wonder what they're up to this time. Another request for money? Or something more than that? I spent the day as usual, reading, walking around the neighborhood, stopping by a small park nearby. I'd been there a lot the last few days, observing people, reflecting on my life. Sometimes I would talk to other elderly people walking their dogs or just sitting on benches. From a woman named Doris, I learned about a senior center 2 blocks away. It offered art and music classes and tours. You should stop by, she said. It's so interesting there. I thought I might look into it. I used to love to paint a long time ago, but had given up that hobby when Randall came along. Child rearing, work, household chores. There was no time for hobbies. Back in the barn, I changed for dinner. I chose a dark blue dress, one of the few decent ones I had left. Brushed my gray hair, even applied some lipstick. Looking in the small mirror over the sink, I saw an older woman with tired eyes, but still a straight back and a firm gaze. A mother who had been betrayed by her own son, but also a woman who had not yet said her last word. At 7 sharp, I knocked on the door of the house. Randall opened, smiling, wearing an apron over his shirt. Mom, come on in. The steaks were almost ready. The house smelled of grilled meat and some expensive perfume. Heather was already sitting at the table, dressed in an elegant black dress, a glass of red wine in her hand. Margaret, you look lovely, she said with a smile that didn't affect her eyes. Thank you, Heather. You too. I sat down at the table and Randall poured me some wine. Expensive, judging by the label. I mentally noted that for people on the verge of financial ruin, they were very lavish on alcohol. Dinner began with casual conversation about the weather, about Randall's work, about Heather's new project. They were unusually attentive, serving me the best bites, refilling my glass. I smiled and kept the conversation going, but inside I was wary. It was like a scene from a movie where the villains put their victims to sleep before attacking. Mom, Randall began as we moved on to dessert, a store-bought cheesecake. Heather and I have been thinking a lot about your situation. My situation? I raised an eyebrow. Yeah, you're alone without a husband in a strange city. The money from the sale of your house is all you have, and we're worried that someone might take advantage of your kindness. I could barely contain a chuckle. Someone like you two? That's very kind of you, I said in a neutral tone. We're thinking about your future, Heather stepped in. We're thinking about how to ensure that you have a peaceful old age without financial worries. Randall nodded and pulled a folded piece of paper out of his pocket. Mom, our company lawyer and I have prepared a document. It's a power of attorney to manage your finances. Here it is. At last they showed their true intentions. Power of attorney? I pretended to be surprised. Why? For your safety, Randall answered quickly. You see, at your age, it's easy to fall victim to fraud or make bad financial decisions. And with this power of attorney, you'll be able to handle my money? I asked you straight out. Not manage it, but help manage it, Randall corrected. We'll make all the big decisions together. Liar. I'd seen the document out of the corner of my eye, a standard power of attorney that gives you complete control over the principal's finances. And what exactly do you plan to do with my money? I asked, sipping my wine. Randall and Heather looked at each other. Well, for starters, we were thinking of consolidating all the funds into one account, Randall said, for ease of management. In your account? In a joint account, Heather answered quickly. You'd have access at any time. But we all knew that was a lie. Once I sign this power of attorney, I won't see my money again. So you want me to give you control of all my money and valuables? Not transfer, Randall corrected, clearly annoyed by my bluntness. And how is that different from handing it over? Mom, you don't understand. No, you don't understand, Randall. I let my anger slip for the first time. I may be old, but I'm not feeble-minded. I understand exactly what you're trying to do. Randall's face changed. The mask of the caring son fell away, giving way to cold irritation. What do you think we're trying to do? Get control of my money. You've already bilked me out of $25,000 under the guise of financial difficulties. Now you want to get your hands on the rest. Heather turned pale and Randall turned red with anger. How dare you? He hissed. After all we've done for you, sheltered you when you had nowhere else to go. Sheltered? I grinned bitterly. In a shed in the backyard? Is that what you call shelter? You should be grateful for a roof over your head. Heather stepped in. Many elderly people end up in nursing homes in the first place. How much do you pay for the upkeep of this nursing home? I asked ironically. Because I remember your implication that I should pay to live in your barn. Randall slammed his fist on the table, making the dishes bounce. That's enough. You live on our property, Mom. Our house. Our rules. And what are those rules? Give you all my money? It's not like that, he objected, but his eyes betrayed the truth. Then what? Why do you need a power of attorney? For your own good, Randall hissed. But if you can't understand that, if you don't trust your own son, maybe you should look for another place to live. This is it, the threat I was expecting. Maybe I should, I said calmly, getting up from the table. Thanks for dinner. I think I'll go to my room. I walked out of the house, feeling their stares on my back. The evening air was warm, but I was shivering. They were no longer trying to hide their intentions. Money or eviction was their ultimatum. Well, I had an answer ready, but they wouldn't know until tomorrow. In the morning, I waited until Randall left for work and Heather went to the gym. Then I called the cab service and hailed a car. The first thing I did was drive to the bank where I took my jewelry out of the safe deposit box and closed the account. Then I visited a lawyer who helped me draw up a new will. Now, instead of Randall, my heirs were two charitable organizations, one to help the elderly, the other to support victims of domestic violence. Afterward, I went to Sunset Gardens, an independent living complex for seniors. The manager showed me a cozy studio apartment with a balcony and its own kitchen. I immediately put down a deposit and the first month's rent. It was real housing worthy of a person, not a shed in the backyard. Back at Randall's house, I started packing. There wasn't much, 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. I folded my clothes neatly, packed photos and books. I put the jewelry in the purse. I was just closing the second suitcase when the barn door opened. Randall and Heather stood in the doorway. From the looks on their faces, they were furious. What's going on? Randall asked, looking at the packed suitcases. Are you going somewhere? I straightened up and looked him straight in the eye. Yes, Randall, I'm moving. Where? Heather intervened. You don't have another place to live. I do now, I replied calmly. I've rented an apartment in Sunset Gardens. Randall turned pale. That expensive retirement complex? Where did you get the money for? He paused and his gaze fell on my purse, from which he could see the edge of a velvet pouch. What's this? He stepped forward and snatched the pouch from the bag. Give it back. I reached for the jewelry, but Randall stepped back. He untied the pouch and dumped the contents into the palm of his hand. A pearl necklace, gold earrings, an amethyst brooch. All of my mother's treasures were in his hands. Where did this come from? He hissed. You said you had no valuables except the money from the sale of the house. I don't have to account for my possessions to you, I said firmly. Now give me my things back. Give it back? Randall laughed, but it was an evil laugh. After you lied to us? After you hid your riches while we were barely making ends meet? Riches? I grinned bitterly. That jewelry is worth a few thousand at most, and they belong to my mother. Still, it's a family heirloom, Randall exclaimed. They should stay in the family. Family? I repeated. Where was family when you put me in the barn? Where was family when you were discussing how to swindle me out of all my money? Where was the family when you said the old woman wouldn't last long? Randall turned even paler. Were you eavesdropping? There's no need to eavesdrop when you're yelling across the yard after a few glasses of wine, I countered. Heather stepped forward, her face contorted with anger. You can't just leave, Margaret. We took you in when you had nowhere else to go. And I'm grateful for that, I said. So grateful that I gave you $25,000 for 3 weeks in the barn. I thought that was more than generous. Randall clenched his fist, still holding my jewelry in his hand. You changed your will, didn't you? He asked suddenly. Disinherited me? I didn't answer, but my face must have betrayed the truth. How could you do such a thing? He shouted, throwing the jewelry on the floor. I am your son, your only child. The son who only sees his mother as a purse, I replied calmly. The son who put me in a barn and waited for me to die so he could inherit. That's not true. Heather also raised her voice. We took care of you. You took care of my money, I corrected, bending down to pick up the scattered jewelry. And that's all you cared about. Randall grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. You can't just walk away. Not after everything we've done for you. I released my hand and straightened up, looking my son in the eye. I can, Randall. And I'm leaving. I'll have a cab pick me up tomorrow morning and you'll never see me again. How could you do that? He shouted again, this time with desperation in his voice. Disinherit me? Hide the jewelry? Leave without warning? I only smiled as I looked at their anger-distorted faces. The night after the confrontation with Randall and Heather passed restlessly. I barely slept, listening to every rustle behind the thin barn door. It wasn't that I was afraid of my son, even when he was angry. He was hardly capable of physical violence. Rather, I feared that they would try to prevent me from leaving, maybe even hide my belongings or documents. But the night went smoothly. At 5 in the morning, I was already on my feet, ready for a new day and a new life. The cab was due at 8. I had purposely ordered it early so Randall wouldn't have to leave for work yet. He needed to see me leave, to hear everything I wanted to say to him. All those years of unspoken words, all those decades of repressed resentment and pretense, they were over. I carefully made my bed, even though I knew I wasn't coming back here. The little habits of a life lived are hard to leave behind. I put the last little things in my suitcase, checked my documents once again, my passport, bank card, insurance, the lease on my new apartment. Everything was in place. At 7:30, I heard movement in the main house. The door slammed, the shower rumbled. They were awake. I sat on the bed and waited. The minutes stretched slowly. I looked at the clock, watching the second hand count down the last minutes of my stay in this place that had never been and could never be home. At exactly 8 o'clock, a cab pulled up. I heard the sound of the engine and the driver's footsteps heading toward home. Then the doorbell rang. I looked out the window and saw Randall buttoning his shirt as he went to open it. Heather was standing in the kitchen and I could see her silhouette through the glass door. I grabbed my suitcase and bag, took one last look around the barn, and walked out into the yard. The morning was crisp and clear, and the birds were chirping in the bushes as if to greet my new day. Mom? Randall stood on the porch looking at me. His face was a mixture of surprise and worry. Are you really leaving? Yes, Randall, I answered firmly. The cab was waiting. Heather walked out of the house, fixing her hair as she went. She was dressed for work, a smart suit, high-heeled shoes. When she saw my suitcases and the cab at the gate, she stopped as if she couldn't believe her eyes. Margaret, you can't just leave, she began. We need to talk, to discuss yesterday. I think I was very clear about yesterday, I said, heading for the gate. Randall blocked my path, standing between me and the exit from the yard. Mom, please, let's talk, he said with concern in his voice. I was wrong yesterday, I said too much. We can discuss everything calmly, like adults. I'm afraid the time for calm discussions is over, Randall. I looked him straight in the eye. Please let me go. No. He crossed his arms over his chest. Not until you explain what's going on. What did you do yesterday? Where did you transfer the money? What did you say to the lawyer? I sighed. Well, if he insists on talking here and now, so be it. Okay, Randall, here's what I did. I closed the Wells Fargo account and moved all the money to another bank. I changed my will so that my heirs are now two charities, not you. I took the family jewelry out of the safety deposit box and rented an apartment in Sunset Gardens, where I'm headed now. Randall's face paled. He clearly hadn't expected such candor. You can't disinherit me, he blurted out. I am your son. I'm your only child. I can, Randall, and I did. But why? His voice trembled. What did I do? What did you do? I grinned bitterly. You put me in the barn like a useless thing. You manipulated me to get my money. You discussed with your wife how I wouldn't last long. You tried to get me to sign a power of attorney to get all my savings. And you're still asking me what you did? Heather stepped closer, her face expressing panic. Margaret, you've got it all wrong, she began. We really wanted to help you with your financial management. At your age, it can be difficult. Spare me the hypocritical explanations, Heather. I cut her off. I understood perfectly well. I was just a means of solving your financial problems. A source of money, nothing more. That's not true, Randall exclaimed. You're my mother. I care about you. You do? I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. Is that what caring looks like to you? You know, Randall, for years I blamed myself for our bad relationship. I thought I was too strict a mother, that I demanded too much of you. But now I see that I'm not the problem. The problem is you, your selfishness and callousness. Randall looked as if I'd hit him. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. Margaret, Heather intervened, we recognize that the barn isn't the best place to live. We can convert the guest room for you, or even give up our bedroom and move downstairs. I looked at her in disbelief. Do you really think this is about comfort? Where I'm going to sleep? It's not about that, Heather. It's about attitude. The way you've treated me from the beginning. We can fix this, Randall said quickly. Give us a chance, Mom. Come back and we'll show you how much we really care about you. There was desperation in his voice, but I saw the truth in his eyes. Not remorse, but fear. Fear of losing access to my money, to the inheritance he was counting on. No, Randall, it's too late for a second chance. I've already made my decision. I tried to go around him, but he blocked my path again. You can't just walk away. He sounded angry now. I won't let you. Randall, my voice grew harsher. If you don't let me go now, I'm calling the police. Do you really want to bring it to that? It worked. He took a step back, his face contorted in a grimace of impotent rage. You'll regret this, he hissed, when you're alone in your expensive apartment with no family, no support. I'd rather be alone than with a family like that, I replied calmly, and walked toward the gate. The cab driver, an old man with a gray mustache, was already waiting for me. He took my suitcase and opened the car door. Wait, Heather shouted, running up to me. Margaret, you can't do this to us. We were counting on your money. We have debts, loans. This is it. The truth at last, unadorned by hypocrisy. My money is my money, Heather, I said firmly. Not yours, not Randall's. It's mine, and I will use it as I see fit. But we're family, she was almost shouting. A family is supposed to help each other. Family is as much about getting help as it is about giving it, I replied. Have you ever thought about the fact that I'm a human being too? That I have feelings, desires, needs? No, to you, I was just a source of money. And now that it's gone, you're panicking. Randall came closer, his face contorted with anger. You're just getting back at me, aren't you? For not being the perfect son? For not calling often enough? For not coming over for the holidays? No, Randall, I shook my head. I'm not taking revenge. I'm just finally starting to live for myself. And I'm protecting what's mine. You're selfish, he spat out. You've always been selfish. All you ever think about is yourself. I grinned bitterly. It's funny coming from you. All my life I've lived for others, for your father, for you. Working 2 jobs so you could go to a good school. Denied myself everything so you could have the best. And this is how you repaid me for it. You were a terrible mother, shouted Randall, losing control. Always criticizing, always demanding more, never satisfied. I wanted you to be a good man, Randall, I said quietly. God knows I tried, but I guess I failed. The words seemed to strike a chord with him. He turned pale and took a step back. You have no right to judge me, he hissed. You have no idea what I've been through. Do you have the right to judge me? I asked. Have you ever thought for a minute what I've been through? How it feels to be widowed after 40 years of marriage? To sell a house full of memories? To move in with a son who puts you in a barn and sees you only as a purse on legs? For a moment, something flashed in his eyes. Shame, maybe. But it vanished quickly, replaced by a cold determination. If you leave now, he said quietly, you may never come back. Never. I'll cut you out of my life. You cut me out of your life a long time ago, Randall, I replied calmly. You just didn't bother to tell me. I got into the cab and closed the door. The last thing I saw was the frozen figures of Randall and Heather in the driveway. They stood there like statues, staring after the car that drove away their hopes of easy money. Family problems? The driver asked, pulling into the driveway. Yes, I answered briefly. It happens. Where are we going, ma'am? Sunset Gardens, please. As we drove through the morning streets of Arlington, I looked out the window at the waking city. People hurried to work, mothers took their children to school, old people walked their dogs, ordinary life going on as it happened. And somewhere in the midst of this flow, I would now be me, not an appendix to my son, not a powerless old woman in a barn, but an independent person with my own life. Thoughts of the confrontation that had just occurred swirled in my head. I remembered Randall's face contorted with anger, Heather's desperate attempts to convince me to stay, their unconcealed panic at the thought of losing access to my money. Did it hurt? Yes, disappointing, absolutely. But there was also something liberating about it. All the cards were finally on the table, no pretense, no false smiles or empty promises. We're almost there, ma'am, the driver said, turning onto a quiet tree-lined street. Sunset Gardens looked even more attractive in the morning light. Neat buildings buried in greenery, well-maintained walkways, elderly people sitting on benches or strolling around the grounds. The place exuded tranquility and dignity, exactly what I was missing in my son's home. I was greeted at the entrance by Gloria, the manager of the complex whom I had met yesterday. Mrs. Brooks, she smiled. You're here sooner than we expected. Your apartment is ready, but if you need help with your things... Thank you, Gloria, but I can manage, I replied. I don't have much luggage. Then let me walk you out. And welcome to Sunset Gardens. We went up to the second floor and Gloria opened the door to my new apartment. It was bright and cozy inside, a living room with a small kitchen area, a bedroom with a wide bed, and a bathroom with handrails for safety. The balcony overlooked the park where the kids from the neighboring school were now playing. I hope you like it here, Gloria said. If you need anything, call any time. And at 3 o'clock, we're having a tea party in the common living room, a great opportunity to get to know the neighbors. Left alone, I sat down on the couch and took a deep breath. A strange feeling, a mixture of relief, sadness, and uncertainty swept over me. I had done it. I had severed my toxic relationship with my son, protected my finances, and found a new place to live. But what's next? What awaited me in this new, independent life? I began unpacking, arranging photos, hanging clothes in my closet. The process of settling in was calming, giving me a sense of control over the situation. When I took out Harold's picture and put it on the bedside table, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel lonely. Paradoxically, I had just severed my relationship with my only close relative, yet I felt not isolation but freedom. Around noon, my cell phone rang, Randall's number. I hesitated whether to answer it, but decided it was better to end it now than leave it unsaid. Yes, Randall? Mom? His voice sounded strained. I want to apologize for my behavior this morning. I was upset. I said some things I shouldn't have. Thank you for apologizing, I replied dryly. Is that all? No, that's not all. He paused. I want you to know that the door to our home is always open to you. If you don't like it at Sunset Gardens, or if you run out of money, oh, that's it. He's still hoping I'll come back, that I can be a source of funding for their family. Thank you, Randall, but I've already made my decision, I said firmly. I like my new apartment, and I don't plan on moving. But Mom, his voice became pleading. We're in a really bad situation. The bank is threatening to take the house away if we don't make the payment by the end of the month. Heather could lose her job due to layoffs. We're Randall, I interrupted. I gave you 25,000 in 3 weeks. Where did that money go? A new watch? Expensive wine? The silence in the phone was more eloquent than any answer. That's exactly what I thought, I sighed. Look, I can't and won't solve your financial problems. You're going to have to learn to live within your means. Maybe sell the house and buy something more affordable. Cut back on your spending. Is that all you have to say? His voice became harsh. Financial advice from a woman who spent her whole life counting pennies? You have no idea how modern life works. Maybe, I agreed. But I know that debts don't get solved by new debts, and problems don't disappear because you're trying to get money out of an elderly mother. You're a heartless old woman, he blurted out. You don't care about your own son. Those words should have hurt, but strangely I felt only tired. No, Randall, you don't care about your own mother, I said quietly. And I think this conversation is over. I hung up without waiting for his response. Then I unplugged the phone and put it in my desk drawer. The talking could wait. Right now, I needed time for myself to make sense of what had happened and decide how to move on. I went out onto the balcony and looked at the park below. Children were playing ball. Elderly people were sitting on benches enjoying the sunny day. A normal, quiet life, and now it would become my life too. Suddenly, I felt a surge of energy. I wanted to explore the compound, meet my neighbors, maybe even sign up for those art classes Gloria had told me about. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was not a burden, not a nuisance, but a person with my own desires and opportunities. I went back to the apartment and finished unpacking. Then I showered, changed into a fresh dress, and decided to go downstairs to look around. In the lobby, I met an older woman who introduced herself as Eleanor. Are you new here? She asked with a friendly smile. I've lived here for 5 years and I can show you around. I'd love to, I replied. My name is Margaret Brooks. Nice to meet you, Margaret. Come on. I'll show you where the library is. Do you like to read? And we walked down the corridors of Sunset Gardens, talking like old acquaintances. Eleanor talked about life in the complex, about the other tenants, about the activities here. I listened and thought about how strangely life works. Sometimes you have to lose a family to find a new home. In the evening, sitting in my new apartment with a cup of tea, I reflected on the events of the last few days. About my son's betrayal, about my own decisive step, about the unknown that now waited ahead. Was it scary? Yes. Was I sorry? No. I took Harold's picture and stared at his kind face for a long time. You see, Harold, I did it after all, I whispered. I found the strength to start a new life. I only wish you were here. I thought he smiled at me from the picture, as if approving my decision. Maybe it was a play of light. Maybe it was more than that. Either way, for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. Peace and hope that even at 75, life can open a new chapter. It had been a month since I'd moved into Sunset Gardens. It's amazing how quickly one can adjust to a new life. My small second-floor apartment now felt like a real home. I arranged a few things, bought houseplants and new curtains. In the mornings, I drank coffee on the balcony, watching the park below wake up. In the evenings, I read books borrowed from the local library or watched old movies on TV. But most importantly, I was no longer alone. Sunset Gardens was home to dozens of seniors like me, many of whom were looking for companionship. Eleanor, the same woman who had first met me, became my true friend. She was 78, had been a widow for 10 years, and had 2 grown daughters who lived in other states. We often went for walks together, had lunch at a small cafe nearby, or just sat in the common living room talking about everything. You know, Margaret, she said to me one day, you've changed a lot this month. When you first came here, you looked so lost. Now you look radiant. Really? I smiled, flattered by her words. It's probably because of the freedom. I don't feel like a burden anymore. Oh, I understand. Eleanor nodded. When my George died, the children wanted me to move in with them. In good faith, of course. But I refused. I didn't want to be the grandmother who sat in the corner knitting socks. I wanted to be me. It was that feeling of being me that I rediscovered every day. In Randall's barn, I was just an old woman, an inconvenient addition to the family. Here I was, Margaret Brooks, an individual with her own interests, desires, opinions. One Wednesday afternoon, while perusing the bulletin board in the lobby, I saw information about a beginner's drawing class. They were held at a community center nearby every Saturday. I stood in front of the announcement, hesitant to sign up. Once upon a time, a long time ago, I had loved to draw. Before I was married, before Randall, before all the life that had sucked me into its routine, I was even pretty good at it. Watercolor landscapes, still lifes with flowers. But then I didn't have time. Then I didn't have the strength. Then I just didn't want to. Are you thinking of signing up? Eleanor had approached discreetly and was now standing nearby, examining the ad. It's Michael Foster's group. He's a great teacher, very patient with us old people. I don't know. I stretched out. It's been so many years since I've held a paintbrush. So? Eleonora shrugged her shoulders. I started practicing yoga at 70. It's never too late to try something new. Or to go back to the old. There was reason in her words. What was I afraid of? That I couldn't do it? That it would be embarrassing? What difference does it make? I'd already been through the worst. The betrayal of my only son. After that, the fear of a blank canvas seemed ridiculous. You're right, I nodded. I'll sign up, right now. So I signed up, and the next Saturday, feeling a strange excitement, similar to what children feel before the first day of school, I went to the class. The class was small, 8 people, all elderly, except for a young woman in her 30s who, I later learned, was recovering from depression and found drawing a kind of therapy. Michael Foster, the teacher, was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a calm voice. He did not rush, did not criticize, only gently guided, showing how to hold a brush, how to mix colors, how to create volume with shadows. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, he said. There are no mistakes in art, only experience. Every stroke is a step towards understanding yourself. The first picture I painted was terrible. Crooked lines, uncertain strokes, faded colors. But Michael found something special in it. You have a sense of composition, he said, looking at my inept still life of apples. And you're not afraid of color. That's good. A lot of beginners are too cautious. After the class, I went home with a light heart. For the first time in a long time, I felt alive. Not just existing, but truly alive with desires, aspirations, joys. At home, I discovered that my phone, which I rarely checked, was full of missed calls from Randall. 5 calls in the last 2 days. I sighed. Part of me wanted to just delete those notifications and forget about my son like he'd forgotten about me all these years. But the other part, the maternal, ineradicable part, was worried. What if something serious had happened? I decided to call back. Randall answered after the first ring, as if he'd been sitting with the phone in his hands, waiting for me to call. Mom? Finally! I thought something had happened to you. I'm fine, Randall, I replied calmly. I've just been busy. Busy? I could hear the disbelief in his voice. What could be busy in a nursing home? Sunset Gardens isn't a nursing home, it's an independent living complex. I corrected him. And yes, I am busy. I have a life of my own. He snorted, but didn't pursue the subject. Listen, Mom, I have some big news. Remember that project I told you about? The investment that didn't work out? Well, there's a chance to make it right. My friend Gordon has found a new investor, but we need some seed money to get us up and running again. Just $50,000, and we can triple that in 6 months. That's it. No concern for my health, no desire to reconcile. Just money. Randall, I've told you before, I will not finance your questionable projects. But this is not a dubious project, he objected. We have a business plan, a marketing strategy, everything is calculated. It's just that last time we didn't have enough time to turn a profit. If everything is so well calculated, why can't you get a loan from the bank? I asked. The silence on the other end of the line was more eloquent than any answer. That's exactly what I thought, I sighed. Look, Randall, I'm not giving you any money. Not $50,000, not $5,000, not $5. It's a final decision. But Mom, there was a pleading note in his voice. This is our last chance. If we don't start the project now, we'll lose everything. The bank has already sent an eviction notice. Heather has had to sell her car. I'm sorry you're having financial problems, I said sincerely. But you don't have to solve them at the expense of your elderly mother. But by cutting back on expenses, finding extra income, maybe selling the house and moving to a smaller place. You just don't understand, he was almost shouting. This is not some whim. This is a matter of survival. Randall, my voice hardened. You're 45 years old. You're a grown man. Solving your problems is your responsibility, not mine. Fine, he spit it out. Live in your own little world, pretend you don't care, but when we end up on the street, it'll be on your conscience. He hung up without waiting for my response. I sat with the phone in my hand, feeling a strange emptiness inside. Not pain, not anger, but emptiness. It was as if the last thread linking me to my son had been severed. The next day, I met Eleanor in the common dining room at breakfast. She noticed my mood and asked me what was wrong. I told her about the conversation with Randall. You know, she said, sipping her coffee, I think you should block his number. What? I looked at her in surprise. Block the number, she repeated. Why torture yourself with this conversation? He won't change, Margaret. He'll call again and again, each time with a new heartbreaking story, each time demanding money, and each time you'll feel guilty, even though you've done nothing wrong. I pondered her words. Maybe she was right. Maybe the only way to truly start a new life is to cut off all ties to the past. I'll think about it, I said. And I did think about it. All day long I weighed the pros and cons. Did I have the right to give up my own son, even if he was so ungrateful and selfish? Wouldn't that be too drastic a step? But on the other hand, don't I deserve a peaceful old age without constant stress and manipulation? That evening, after a drawing class where I started working on a new still life, this time with flowers, I made a decision. I pulled out my phone, found Randall's number, and blocked it. It was a strange feeling, a mixture of relief and bitterness. It was like I'd buried a part of myself, but at the same time I was free of a heavy weight. That night I slept soundly, dreamless as I hadn't slept in years. Days added up to weeks, weeks to months. Life at Sunset Gardens went on as usual, calm and measured. I continued to take art classes, where I gradually improved my skills. Michael said I had a talent, especially for landscapes. You see things that others miss, he said. The details that make a painting come alive. Besides painting, I found other things to do. I signed up for a book club where we discuss classic literature and contemporary novels. I started attending classical music concerts that were sometimes held at the community center. I even tried yoga for the elderly, although it was harder than I expected. My old joints didn't always obey. One day, coming back from a walk, I saw a familiar figure at the entrance to Sunset Gardens. Randall. He was standing there, shuffling from foot to foot, clearly nervous. I hesitated, wondering if I should approach him or turn around and walk away. But he spotted me before I could make up my mind. Mom! He came toward me. Finally! I've been waiting for you for an hour. He looked gaunt, shadows under his eyes, and his suit, once expensive and elegant, now looked shabby. Randall? I nodded. What are you doing here? You blocked my number, he said reproachfully. I had no other way to contact you. I blocked your number because I didn't want to talk anymore, I answered bluntly. It was a conscious choice, not a technical error. He wrinkled his nose as if in pain. Mom, I know I've behaved. Not in the best way. But you can't just cut me out of your life. I'm your son. And you cut me out of your life years ago, I countered. You only remembered me when you needed money. He lowered his eyes, unable to find anything to say. Look, Randall, I continued in a softer tone. I don't hate you. I'm just tired of being manipulated, of feeling guilty all the time, of being used. I want to live the rest of my days in peace. I understand, he said quietly. But Mom, we're really desperate. We lost our house. We're living with a friend of Heather's now, in his guest room. I lost my job. And you've come to ask for money, I finished for him. He looked up at me with eyes full of despair. Yes, I came to ask for money. Not 50,000, not 30,000, just 10. So that we could rent an apartment, get on our feet. I looked at my son, a grown man who had never learned to take responsibility for his actions, who was always looking for easy ways and quick fixes. And suddenly I was not so much offended as sad. Sad for him, for the man he'd become, for the life he'd chosen for himself. No, Randall, I said firmly. I'm not giving you any money. Not 10,000, not $10. It won't help. It will only delay the inevitable. You need to learn to live within your means, to find a job, maybe not as prestigious as you used to, but stable. A grimace of anger crossed his face. You, he spat out. You've always been like this, cold, calculating, never really loved me. I loved you more than anything, Randall, I said quietly. But love doesn't mean indulging your every whim and paying for your mistakes. Sometimes love is about saying no. Stop lecturing me. He raised his voice, attracting the attention of passers-by. You are a pathetic, lonely old woman who will die alone. Those words should have hurt, but strangely I felt only calm. Maybe, I agreed. But I will die with dignity and with the knowledge that I have lived honestly. Now please go away, and don't come back. I walked around him and headed for the front of the building. He shouted something at me, but I didn't turn around. There was a strange calm inside me, as if the last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. I had made a choice in favor of myself, my peace of mind, my new life. That evening, I sat on the balcony for a long time, watching the sun go down. I thought about the past, about Harold, about Randall the child, about all the years I had devoted to my family. Was I sorry? Sometimes. But I also realized that you can't change the past. You can only accept it and move on. Another 3 months passed. My life at Sunset Gardens took on a new rhythm. I made friends among the neighbors, took regular art classes, even started a small poetry reading group. My paintings, watercolor landscapes and still lifes, became good enough to be hung in the lobby of the complex in a small exhibit of residence work. I didn't hear from Randall. Sometimes I thought about him, wondering how his life had turned out, if he'd gotten out of the financial hole. But those thoughts didn't hurt as much as they used to. I made a decision, and I lived with him in peace. One morning, checking the mail, I found an envelope with unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a postcard with a view of Seattle and a short note. Mom, I moved to Seattle. I found a job with a construction company, not as prestigious as before, but stable. Heather didn't come with me, so we broke up. I'm not apologizing or asking for money. I just wanted you to know that I'm alive and trying to start over. Randall. I reread the note several times, feeling strangely relieved. Not joy, not pride, but exactly relief. Maybe my son was finally starting to grow up. I didn't respond to the card, not out of anger or resentment, but because I felt that everything was said between us. Maybe someday, if he really changed, we could repair the relationship, but not now. Right now, we both needed time and space. Life went on. Every day, I appreciated my new freedom, my new hobbies, my new friends more and more. I no longer felt like a burden or an extra person. I was Margaret Brooks, an amateur artist, a book club member, a friend, a neighbor. A woman who, at 75, found the courage to start over. On my 76th birthday, I invited some friends from Sunset Gardens over for a small dinner at my apartment. Eleanor helped with the cooking. Arthur, a former musician, brought his violin and played some beautiful tunes. We drank wine, remembered our youth, laughed at old jokes. When everyone had dispersed, I went out on the balcony with a glass of wine. The night sky was studded with stars. The air smelled of jasmine from the neighbor's garden. I thought about the past year, about all the changes that had taken place in my life. About the barn in Randall's backyard, about his attempts to bilk me out of money, about my decision to leave and start a new life. Was it easy? No. Was it right? Absolutely. I raised my glass to the starry sky as if in a toast. To new beginnings, I whispered. To freedom. Here's to a life that goes on no matter what. And in that moment, standing on the balcony of my small but cozy apartment, surrounded by the warmth of new friends and the freedom of my own decisions, I realized one simple truth. It's never too late to start living for yourself. It's never too late to free yourself from toxic relationships, from manipulation, from other people's expectations. Even at 75 years old, especially at 75 when every day becomes especially precious.